Time family. So I'm up early, trying to get my walk on before everybody in the neighborhood gets out, start moving around. I was up reading this morning. I started in the book Pathways by Tony Evans. That book is specifically a deep dive into understanding the book of Esther. And it illuminates more than anything how God is never mentioned in that book, but his fingerprints are all over it. And specifically what I was looking at this morning, we're just talking about how if we don't have our antenna lined up with the presence or tuned into the presence of God, how we'll miss his leading. We'll miss his guiding us along the path that he wants us to go on. And it also talks about how God will use negatives to create or turn them into positives. And, it made me post something this morning, specifically attached to the book of Acts, chapter 16 with Paul and Silas. And I started thinking about, being an old math teacher. It's a mathematical law that two negatives multiplied always equals a positive. And no matter where you do math, no matter how you do it, that's going to always find itself to be true. When you multiply two negatives, it's going to always equal a positive. And right now, we got so much that's going on in the world, so much that's going on in our lives, right? We're dealing with this pandemic, and it's literally shut the world down for all rights and purposes. So we already have a negative. And as a result of that, so many people are dealing with financial hardships, or they're dealing with loss of loved ones, lost jobs, some people losing their homes, whatever. It's almost like a negative on top of a negative on top of a negative. But again, if your antenna is not tuned into the right frequency, then you'll miss what it is that God is doing, how he's leading, which direction he's trying to push us, and not really so much push us, but lead us to, understanding that he's in control of where we are and what's going on. He's in control of what's happening in our lives. But if we're not tuned into the right frequency, then we're going to miss it. So it led me to ask the question, what frequency are you on? I believe that, the world is in need of a tune-up, if you really look at it. But in that, still, the revelation in that, because Shakespeare said that there's sermon in stones, and that's one of them. There's one simple mathematical law. Two negatives always equal a positive. All this stuff that's going on is looked upon as being negative, and it is. However, we have to understand that God is in control. He has his hand all over this thing. And if we just submit and surrender to him, then we'll understand that he's up to something. And he's always up to something. It just takes the people of God to really tune in and pay attention to where he is and what's going on to understand what he's doing. So when I look at the book of Acts, specifically chapter 16, like I said, we're talking about Paul and Silas. And when you think about that, Paul and Silas was on their, I believe, their second missionary trip. And it says that they were going down to the spot to pray, where everybody prays so they can go and spread the gospel. So it says they run into this one young lady who was considered a slave. So she was already enslaved, but she was also demon possessed. And her being demon possessed gave her some ability to be able to predict or tell the future. So you had some guys in her city that wanted to use that and did use that to their advantage. And so they had her working for her, being something like a fortune teller, if you will, so that they'll be able to make wealth off of her demon possession. So you talk about a double negative. She was enslaved and she was demon possessed. Well, she made an announcement to the city that these two men, Paul and Silas, and all the men that were with them, were only there to try to do whatever they can to help folks get saved. So she made the announcement of what they were there to do before anybody could even know what was going on. And the Bible says that this happened day after day after day. And so the crazy part is, it got to the point where Paul was so upset and so bothered, like, man, this woman would not leave us alone. So I know how I'm gonna fix that. Paul looked at the woman and he said, you know what, since you possess and you getting on my last nerve, he said, watch this. In the name of God, I command you, he's speaking to the demon now, I command you to leave this woman. And the Bible says that immediately, the demon, the spirit, left the woman immediately. So now, of course, the people that she worked for, they bothered now. Like, man, now you messing with my money. So they met and shouted out to everybody in the city and to the authorities that, you know, these people here doing something that's against the law. So they need to be handled because, of course, now their money getting short, right? So the city officials, the government, if you will, they decided, hey, you know what? Take these two men and all the men with them, strip them, and beat the brakes off of them, and then put them in prison. Again, we're talking about negative, right? So they did that. And so the Bible says that Paul and Silas was praying, and they had a jailer who was put in charge of making sure that they were put so deep and so far in the jail that they couldn't escape and nobody could get to them. So he put them in an inner jail, is what they called it. And so as Paul and Silas was praying, I'm pretty sure you all have heard some preacher, you know, hoop about it, whatever the case may be. Paul and Silas was praying. The Bible says that around about midnight, God caused the earth to shake. And him causing the earth to shake, of course, created an earthquake. And as a result of that, now the shackles that had them bound pretty much set them free. The prison where they were locked up at, all the doors opened up. And watch this, the earth shook so hard and so bad that it woke the jailer up. And once he woke up and was alerted to the fact that everybody was set free, he immediately felt defeated. He immediately felt like he failed at his job and didn't do what he was supposed to do. So at that point, he made a decision to say, you know what? This horrible thing that I've allowed to happen, my life is not even worth staying around for whatever it is, the circumstances that I'm gonna have to deal with because I failed so bad. And the crazy part for a lot of us is sometimes we feel like we've done so much wrong, we've done so much bad, we rather give up and let go versus just dealing with whatever it is that come along with it. The problem is a lot of times we never really know what's gonna come out on the other side of whatever this most horrible thing is that we think that we've done. So watch this. As he's beginning to fall on his sword, because the Bible said he took his sword out and he was going to kill himself, Paul and they yelled out, hey, don't kill yourself, man, we still in here. And so the jailer is looking at that and he's like, wait a minute. So you all have been set free. Your shackles have been loosed. The gates of the jail have opened up, and yet all of y'all are still in here? So at that point, the Bible says he went and fell to his knees, right? And he asked Paul and Silas, man, what must I do to be saved? So what that says to me is he has some idea who God is and how God works. He just wasn't in tune. His antenna wasn't on the right frequency. But now he had a chance to get a tune up. You see how the Lord works some of that stuff out? And he does that for all of us. There's many of us who believe, who know God, but we don't show no remnants of it. When we leave a place, there's no evidence that God was present in us in that place. And so this jailer was in that position. So what ends up happening is Paul and Silas and all the men went to Paul says, you know what, look, if you just surrender and accept God in your life, you will be saved. And not only that, your whole house will be saved. So now all it takes is the one action of this one man who thought that he was so horribly wrong to not only save himself, but also save his family. So the jailer, whose job was to keep them in prison, has now taken them to his home. The Bible says that he took care of their wounds. Because remember, they got beat to death. Well, not to death, but they got the brakes beat off of them. And so he took them to his home, addressed and cleaned their wounds. And as a result of that, he accepted Christ, his family did. They all got baptized and everybody was saved, right? And so then the officials, the city, sent someone to the house and said, man, tell them dudes they got to go. And Paul looked at them and said, wait a minute, you want us now to go away secretly after y'all done beat us to death in front of everybody without a trial? Y'all done put us in prison without a trial, and now y'all want to leave secretly? You know, Paul was gangster. Paul said, man, I dare not. He said, I wish I would leave here after y'all done all this that y'all done to me, and I'm supposed to just turn around and leave? Paul said, not me, I'm not doing it. You tell them if they want me to go, they need to come tell me themselves. So, and then not only that, he said, man, we're Romans, just like y'all. And all of a sudden, you want me to just leave? He said, no, absolutely not. Tell them to come do it themselves. And so the government had to bow down and humble themselves to go to the jailer's house. And not only to the jailer's house, watch this. Paul and Silas and all the men, they went back to the jail. And I believe that that was in order to make sure that the jailer really didn't get himself in trouble, because he's now saved. He's now in the family of Christ. And he does such an awesome thing, not only for himself, but for his family. They were in tune to what he had done and the change that had made in his life. And they didn't want any hardship to come against him. So they all went back to the jail. And that's where the city officials came and said, look, we didn't know that y'all were Romans. But even more so than that, we recognize and understand what we've done, and we don't want to have nothing to do with your God. And not from that perspective, they don't want to have nothing to do with God, but we don't want no trouble with God. That's really what they were saying, man. We don't want no trouble. So can y'all just please leave? Please. And so at that point, of course, the Bible says that the men, they left and they went back to Lydia's house. Here's the crazy thing. With all the negative that's happening right now, if the people of God are just willing to stand up like Paul and Silas did and said, look, y'all need to recognize and understand the authority of God and what's going on. And when y'all get to that place and you humble yourselves, then maybe some real true change may take place. So in all that, all I'm saying is, in all this calamity and all this dismay that appears to be going on, if the people of God would just do what the Bible says, humble themselves and pray, if we take a stand for God, if we stand on the truth, then maybe, just maybe, the government will even see and humble themselves. Can't say that they're gonna bow down, but at least they'll see and they'll humble themselves and recognize the true power that's in place. And that they were just given authority. And even though they're sometimes misusing that authority, there's an opportunity for them to do right. All in all, we who are called by his name, we need to learn how to take a stand, even in tough times. Because God allows negatives in order to create positives. But he needs some folks that's gonna be bold enough, that's gonna be willing enough to take a stand for what's right. So don't fall into the trap of just assimilating with what's going on in the world and what's happening. And understand that even though we all are technically kind of on the even playing field, we're all going through some things, don't lose sight of what God is trying to do in, with, and through you. And understand that wherever you are in your life, whatever is going on in your life, that there's a much better outcome on the other end. So we just have to make sure that we stay focused on the fact that the Bible says, we will reap a harvest, if we just don't quit, if we just don't give up, don't bow down to what's going on. Don't act like you don't have faith and lose sight of how God has worked, is working, will work in your life. Ty Tribbett had a song, and it holds very true even to this day. He says, if he did it before, he'll do it again. Same God right now, same God back then. Simple math. 2 negatives multiplied will always equal a positive. God bless you.